Nick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with even before you founded the company, would love to start with GraphQL, which has become many people use it. It's very popular and it's very hard to build something that takes off. So going back to your Facebook Meta days, what was the moment when GraphQL was getting created, and what led you to do that?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One was kind of the stack we built up to GraphQL, and then two is like what was the instigating event that caused it to be created. I think both are interesting. Leading up to GraphQL, my entire I was obsessed. It's all I did was work on our PHP code base and specifically our data fetching stack. And so there are some internal frameworks at Facebook that still live on today, not Meta, but it's in the Facebook app primarily. And this is it's effectively a business object layer in a middle tier query language for Facebook. So it's Ent query. The details don't matter, but if you're a Facebook developer working the PHP code base, you interact with this. It's kind of deep in the code base. And we kind of developed this declarative data fetching API that's in PHP, but has a lot of similar properties to GraphQL. And in fact, GraphQL in its initial implementation was effectively a thin wrapper on top of that layer. So it was more like a building up to it over time and figuring out it was a very incremental process, actually. Then the instigating event about why it occurred is that kind of famously, we had bet on HTML5 for the mobile apps. That was a disaster. We were about to go public. We had embarked on this project to rewrite the iOS app from scratch, but we needed a API. They initially tried to build it on top of our platform APIs, which was totally unrealistic. Then people were starting to build custom REST APIs for the app, but our feed in particular is an extraordinarily complicated data structure. There's stories and nested stories and attachments and comments. And then it's an incredibly complicated product actually with a bajillion stakeholders. Every product team tries to get in the feed because that's how they get distribution. And one of my colleagues who I'd previously been right on a team with, but he was on the iOS team, he kind of stopped by my desk every day and was like, by the way, Nick, I don't know what you're working on, but we're screwed as a company if we don't fix this. And we can't get actual data into the app. Please come help us. And I'm like, well, I'm working on this other thing. But then that kind of fourth time I heard that, I was like, oh, maybe I should look at that. And then kind of a few other people were working on similar problems. Lee was working on the API, kind of the more static API and data modeling of feed. Another colleague, Dan Schaefer, was working on infrastructure and feed. And then I kind of had the wide angle context, having worked on that stack that led up to it, and kind of it all kind of came together pretty quickly to build an initial prototype. And then it was extraordinary momentum at that point because we were about to go public. Mobile was an existential threat. It was kind of we really felt that this very important company in our minds that does a lot of work would die if we didn't do this. So we were highly motivated. And so that's kind of the story of how that happened. I look back on it very fondly. We were absolute maniacs. Because the initial diff was February, and then we were kind of ready to launch in May. So just a few months to build this entire stack and make it work in the app. Then we actually had to we basically paused for a month to wait to launch it because of some policy changes that need to be made. But it was really an extraordinary 3-month sprint. Look back on it very fondly.
Amazing. It's incredible how what we think of as huge, complicated products in the beginning are usually they get shipped so fast, and things that can take years, sometimes they never take off. But this, in what is a very compressed timeline, it has made a huge impact. Taking a step back, if you had to explain data orchestration, why it matters in the engineering world to somebody who's not from technology, how would you explain it? Why do we care about data and data orchestration, especially in these massive products like Meta has Instagram and WhatsApp? So why does it matter so much?
Right. So just to be clear, GraphQL was not a data orchestration product. That was a client server API.
Yeah.
And what Pratik is talking about is kind of the current project was called Dagster, which is a data orchestrator of the data space. So how to explain it? I think the way I would explain it, and you were asking kind of to give me an audience. There's my mother, There's like the MBA graduate who is not technical, like what's our
Yeah, let's the latter. Let's go with the latter. Basically, you're at a company. Maybe you're working on product, or maybe you're in marketing, sales. Basically, you're not like deep in data land.
got
So,
it. Okay.
how should they think about data orchestration?
Right. So every company has a data platform. So data flows in from applications, from sensors, from external vendors, from your SaaS apps. There's all this stuff that needs to happen, and you need to activate and operationalize that data in any number of ways, all the way from building charts, building machine learning models, and even powering your applications. It's like the lifeblood of every modern business now. These data platforms, the reason why I use that word is that there are tons of different tools that flow this data through the system. And the way to think about it is that all this data is computed, right? So all data comes from somewhere and goes somewhere. And if you're looking at your chart that is driving your business decisions, probably upstream of that in a complicated business are hundreds, if not thousands, of other data sources that have been computed along the way. So in order to make all that work, you need kind of a conductor, an orchestrator that orders the computations, orders that this happens and this happens and this happens. And you need to be able to do that reliably. A fancy word for that is a control plane, but people generally talk about the orchestrator. Now, this process is very complex, and you're trying to model a complicated world. Our take, well, I can go into our take later, but that's the orchestrator solves this ordering problem. And then on top of that, it requires observability and debugging tools, because this is where things go wrong in production and where all the different stakeholders in the system kind of have to get together, at least ideally, to debug stuff. So it's an operational tool, but it kind of serves to bring the entire data platform together to make sure things run on time and your data arrives in a timely fashion.
That's actually a good segue into my next question about Dagster. So you founded Dagster, and Dagster, the open source project, and also Dagster Labs, the company. As a starting point, what's the best way to explain what Dagster is, the open source tool? And then we can go into the company.
So Dagster is a framework that enables people to create data pipelines and data platforms. So it is a Python framework. You can install it on your local laptop, and you can start to put together these pipelines like in code. Kind of our philosophy here is that it's very important to model not just the kind of the set of tasks that end up producing like the data assets that drive your business, but it's very important to model those assets themselves in software. And that allows you to take a much more declarative, principled approach to building data pipelines in the same way that Kubernetes was kind of an advance where you could declaratively say in Kubernetes, like, I need this piece of infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. You describe the end state you want declaratively. And then because you give the system that much information, it can do all sorts of stuff for you. In the end, what that allows you to do is that instead of just the orchestrator being one of many tools that you have to assemble together to get a cohesive view of your data platform, I know every DevTool and SaaS observability tool says this, but we are that single pane of glass for the data practitioners. So they can, in one spot, develop their data pipelines, understand lineage, understand data quality, data observability tools, cataloging tools, and so forth. And that might sound like it's like a bunch of products put to, that's like overly scoped or something. But what's interesting is that when you model the assets in software, it's like difficult not to have those features because you need a list of your assets, right? The lineage just comes with the programming model, right? Why wouldn't you render it? So it's just kind of like this sort of like consolidation of tools isn't like a forced marriage. It naturally falls out from the abstractions. And that's really powerful for practitioners and data engineers. It just provides them like one view, and also their stakeholders, by the way, but that's a whole nother discussion. So that is kind of our take. In the end, the way I like to describe it is that we have three pillars of value here. One is productivity. So we really believe in software engineering life cycles, and kind of previous iterations of orchestrators do not, right? They viewed themselves purely as operational tools, don't have a really productivity solution. So productivity. And then we also think about scale a lot. We're built to be multi-tenant. I didn't really talk about that, but these platforms that are heterogeneous, there's lots of different stakeholders. You need to be able to you need kind of a federated approach there. And then three is context. We provide like unprecedented context on the data platform by having this core abstraction. And then that kind of like represents our entire life cycle from develop, deploy, observe.
Let's go into the product philosophy for a second. You mentioned assets a couple of times, and I want to uh, dig deeper on that. So assets versus tasks. So Dagster, you talk about thinking in assets. For listeners who may not have dug deep into data infra, how do you define an asset? Why is it why should they care about more thinking in assets here?
So an asset is any durable artifact produced by a data pipeline that captures some knowledge about the world. Okay, that sounds fancy. Let's give a concrete example. A table in a data warehouse, a PDF report that gets emailed out. You can think of a dashboard as an asset, a machine learning model, right? Like a machine learning model in the end is a file that's put somewhere. So those are all assets, right? And we use that term because it represents the reality of the heterogeneity of what's going on in these platforms. They produce all sorts of stuff. So assets are the outputs of a data pipeline that is consumed by downstream stakeholders, whether that's a human being or another piece of software. So that is what I think modeling the asset is very intuitive, actually. Just think about this example. Some downstream person is querying a database table or data warehouse table, and some data is wrong. They don't know who to talk to. They might know a tool or something. Just the simple act of them being able to say, hey, table users in this schema looks wrong. They can go and look up directly in Dagster based on what that table name is and understand like why it's computed and like all sorts of information about it. If instead you're in a pure task-based workflow engine and it's a scale, God forbid, where does the user's table get computed, right? There's like no index, no information. It's very difficult to trace, actually. So this simple example of you modeling your system in terms of in the language and concepts that all your downstream stakeholders think about is just very powerful in terms of that communication line. And the other thing then is that you have a new source of truth, this software artifact, which represents the asset that you can attach all sorts of metadata onto, for example, and then control all that with software engineering process, right? So imagine like you're like, as a data platform provider, you're like, okay, every single asset that's marked with this tag, say it's like a gold tag, something, also needs an owner and like some cost information, other metadata, right? You can actually just run a test in your CI/CD pipeline to, to enforce that, right? And you do it at the source when it's written. And that dynamic is very, very powerful. And if you don't have that source of truth software artifact that represents the data set or this machine learning model, et cetera, there's no place to plug in to do that. And then what happens with this policy stuff, it ends up being enforced way down the curve in some other tool, maybe some other team. Like people are like going around with Excel spreadsheets, manually tracking stuff down. It's insanity. So in a lot of ways, by capturing the asset as a software artifact, we're able to shift left a ton of processes, which is huge for productivity and management.
And also you have Dagster, have a thriving open source community, and you also have a business to run. What principles guide you to figure out what features stay free, what should land in the paid offering, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, I kind of divide it into three domains of complexity, so to speak. And one is like technical complexity of code and in the framework. That is like always default to open source. And that's both for conceptual reasons, but also practical reasons. Like if the code is coexisting with a user's code in the same process, like we're a framework, right? Where the user writes Python code and then we invoke it. And like we share the same stack trace and all sorts of stuff. And almost for practical reasons, you want it to be open source and installable by, in a package registry and all that sort of stuff. But there's also just like the conceptual, there's also kind of the philosophical aspect of that where you want to solve complexity, technical complexity, alongside your users. You want them to help you with integrations. You want them to give feedback on your stuff that's involved with integrations where the contract is a little more messy. So there's technical complexity. Then there's operational complexity. The way I like to think about it is that where there's operational complexity, where we can solve problems with massive economies of scale, that is good fodder for making it proprietary and hosted. Let me give you a simple example of if we have some complicated index optimized for performance and we need to recompute it, do schema migrations, do all sorts of complicated stuff, maybe like have like a secondary index and Elasticsearch or something like that. That is very complicated to do, and rolling that out to an entire community and expecting them to keep that upgraded, even if we wanted to, like we would literally, like all engineering would ground to a halt doing that. So I think the reality of that, like, we're a small, lean, mean team. And, instead of managing people across the world, upgrading their infrastructure to have like a search cluster and all this operationally intense stuff, we centrally host it and we can roll out these changes extremely quickly. So, but people also want to run stuff, to production, for a subset of use cases to get started or, mid-sized production deployments. We want that too. It's not like we're like not going to fix a bug in our Kubernetes implementation to like, compel people to use the closed source product. And then finally, there's organizational complexity. And all the kind of complex application ontology related to that, RBAC and kind of enterprise features. And we think that's, squarely in the province of the commercial product. One, the reality of the business is that we need to have an incentive for people to use a commercial product. But that is also the type of capability that we think is much better centrally delivered. You can iterate on products dramatically faster in a centralized SaaS format as opposed to kind of distributed it out to everyone. And, like we would never be, I don't think it would be very difficult in my mind for us to deliver an RBAC product that's as good as ours in the open source domain because it's complicated and interacts with our servers in complicated ways. And we want to be able to fix bugs quickly and not force people to do version upgrades and change management rollout. It's just too complicated for us. So it's kind of a combination of like where our engineering resources have the most leverage and then where we have the right crossover points so that we can have a viable commercial product so that we can run our goal is to have an awesome business and an awesome open source product at the same time. So, there's also practical realities here.
That's amazing. Actually, that's one of the clearest answers I've heard, because many times, and that's a real answer. I mean, many times people are like, hey, I want the open source they have the nice answer, but the practical business reality is that sometimes complex stuff, you have to bring it into the paid offering, because even if you give it for free, it just won't do anything, as you said. Now, in the early days of building the open source tool, how did you get people to care? Meaning, what went right? If you had to look back and say, hey, this is the one thing we did really right, which is why the community grew. Like, what is that? Or rather, what would you tell maybe somebody else who's trying to do that now?
I'm trying to think if I have any novel advice on this front. I think there's a couple things. One, be differentiated in terms of your messaging. Have a narrow audience in mind that you think would resonate to something, and then communicate loudly about who you're catering to and who you're not catering to. Because if the if people who are potentially going to adopt your technology, if they feel seen, so to speak, they will be willing to tolerate uneven experiences and missing features to get to that core kind of philosophical alignment. So I think it's very important to have a thesis around what you believe in, and then communicate that clearly and loudly with the knowledge that you're going to exclude people. That's actually desirable. You don't want to attract people to the project who won't successfully engage with it. So in the early days, it was kind of a very simple message for us. It's like software engineering process is incredibly important data pipelines. No other system tries to address it. If you think that instant feedback loops in your development workflow and having good CI/CD pipelines and a pleasurable local development experience is critical for you, you should come take a look at us. So just like that sort of talk about why you exist in addition to, and this is different for different projects too. Like for our project, that was that. I like to contrast that with, well, we can get into maybe advice for founders later, but I'll talk about what would work for us. That, and then a combination of that and do things that don't scale is very important. That's kind of very traditional Paul Graham YC advice, but it's very true. Um, you should be on the ground. It's critical to get fast feedback loops as quickly as possible, as early as possible in the development of any product. And often you have to schlep and work really hard and really spend a ton of time with those early initial customers or users to, get involved. And that means building rapport so they feel like they're participating in the process of development. So that means you need to respond to feedback quickly, but then they're also willing to kind of roll with the punches on stuff. So I think managing those early design partners is super critical. And then you can leverage that to further success as they refer people and you can talk. And especially if they're people who will talk loudly about the product experience, that goes a long way as well.
And moving to Dagster Labs, the company, and today you have a business to run. Are there any community signals that you monitor that could perhaps serve as a good sign of, hey, this is where the help is, and this is this information, and I can use it to run the company? So, what signals do you monitor that are helpful to you to run the company?
It's a good question. It's kind of changed over time as the tools have evolved and the maturity of the product. Slack is kind of the central hub of where our community lives. Weekly actives is important on there. We have a chatbot in Slack where people can ask can ask questions about the product and get answers. Activity there is very important. Then it's also important to capture activity outside of Slack as well, because there's lots of people who want to engage in Slack. And I think, views on your documentation is very good, quite a good proxy, but maybe less so over time because of AI bots. That's why I keep on mentioning the tools. Like the tools alter over time and kind of affect what signals you can get. We use a tool called Common Room, which can kind of aggregate signals from across a bunch of different social media properties. So we also do lots of vibe checks, so to speak, on who's saying what. We've found actually the data engineering Reddit particularly high signal. Because there's kind of real talk and people look at it. So we take feedback given there pretty seriously. It's like the place people look, There are literally employees at Dagster Lab that were like, oh yeah, I saw all these people raving about you on Reddit. So that was very interesting to me. Um, so measurement's super hard. Everyone can be gamed. So I do think you need to kind of take a holistic approach, which maybe sound like a dodge, but it is the reality of the world. But those are just some of the signals.
Now, going to the early days of getting paying customers, looking back, how did you get your first 10 customers? And more importantly, like what learnings can you share? What went right? And what, if you had to do it again, what would you do differently?
It's a good question. I don't know if I can come up with a good answer on the spot for you. I can tell you how we got our initial ones, and that was mostly just being high touch with the community. It was definitely all community facing. You kind of know who doesn't want to deal with their infrastructure and who wants the enterprise features. Like, okay, we need a Google Auth and we need integrations. We need integrations with some enterprise tools and RBAC and all these features. So you should kind of have like a customer list in the open source context. You should kind of know who your first, because we closed our first 20 customers in like 2 months or something. Like it was pretty quick.
Hmm.
We signed our like first customer like the end of December, I think, 21. And then we had like 30 by the end of January, I think, or end of February, something like that. It was pretty fast. But as well, then we kind of like blew out our pipeline, so to speak, and kind of like we kind of until we uh, uh, grew up. So I think that was very critical. And then, it's a lot of like similar to onboarding the open source folks, there's a lot of schlepping at first, especially we have a bit of a complex infrastructure configuration because people need to run at least some of their data platform on prem, and so we have this approach hybrid that makes it so that we don't see their code or their data, but we can still host a bunch of the infrastructure for them, like the web server and long running processes that keep everything alive, and a bunch of state metadata state. So that was kind of the story. In terms of, I would need to reflect more on what we would have done differently. It was actually a while ago, so I feel like I would have to kind of shuffle through my memory and talk to the people who were around, our head of sales, especially those days. In terms of give a lot of flexibility in terms of pricing, in my opinion. I think like one thing we did is we tried to price the product in a way that like copied something like Snowflake and just straight up usage based consumption on a single metric, but it didn't align with the way that the customers perceived the value of the system. And it also didn't align with our COGS, our cost of goods sold. And engineers are smart and they don't like that. They kind of morally accept an upcharge on infrastructure, but value metrics are more difficult to justify. So I think really understanding it helps a lot if you have a deep understanding in terms of how the customer perceives the value of the product and aligning your pricing to that instead of like kind of trying to, from a pure business, optimize only for the business. And we weren't trying to do that for a selfish way. Like we wanted simplicity. We thought we had a pricing model that was good for customers because like one single metric and you could kind of easily predict it, but it didn't align with the way they perceive the value of the platform.
As you've grown the company from early days to now you've raised Series B or beyond that, how has the company culture evolved? Because as an open source engineering heavy early team, now you're scaling, you're signing big contracts and go to market like sales, marketing, it becomes just more and more important. One, how has the company evolved? And two, how has your own style of leadership evolved in the last few years?
It's a broad question. I guess I'll focus on the company culture. Well, I mean, I think the obvious things. One is that the composition of the team changes a lot, right? Before it was like almost all engineering and some ops staff and product staff, almost all R&D. And now we have a substantial go-to-market organization, right? We have somewhere around 80 and 90 head count, and 30% of 40% of that is engine R&D. So we have more go-to-market people than engineering folks now, which obviously changes the culture. You end up being more metrics driven, at least a subset of the culture. Because there is like I was talking before about like, oh, there's like all these different signals from the open source community, and and you have to take a holistic approach. Like, once you're a revenue generating company in enterprise SaaS, there are pretty well defined metrics that you optimize for, and they don't lie. So that instills a more disciplined process and operational rhythm that inevitably ends up being aligned with quarters and the quota attainment schedule of your salespeople, because it just it just is a rhythm that impacts the company. Like sometimes you can isolate ends from that, but sometimes, you get brought in for stuff. So one thing I really like about being in a commercial context is you actually, in a lot of ways, deepen your relationship with customers and users. And you're in an open source community, it's often a little more abstract. You're interfacing through Slack or GitHub or other tools. And like, yes, you do webinars and conferences and stuff like that, but the relationship is different once you have sales processes. I love sales engineers. I think they're like an unsung hero of kind of these businesses, they are technical enough to know what's going on, but they are hand to hand with customers, so to speak. I always tell, if a colleague of mine is kind of moving, say, from like big tech to, a DevTools company that's a vendor, a frequent piece of advice I give is like, go find the best sales engineers and talk to them. Skip the PMs. Make sure to talk to them without the PMs around, because the sales, not that you don't trust the PMs, they just will, the conversation will be different. And especially if you ask the right questions, because the sales engineers know the truth. The good ones do. They live with the product. They see the emotional reactions of the customer. Like, they don't have to try to go talk to customers. It is their job. They run the demos. They know like what's these, like they have the right SE could have the keys to the castle for you. And you want to have a good relationship with them and you want to get real information on the ground. And I really like that level of engagement that happens once you have assuming you have a healthy sales process. And then the other thing, you can get more metrics driven too, and you can actually do development faster, which is a little counterintuitive, is that you have metrics on how people are using your product, and you can ship it more quickly. So you can actually, again, I think it's counterintuitive because you think, oh, you're shipping to businesses now and like you have to be more cautious and et cetera. It's actually better for everyone if you can ship quickly. You can ship bugs faster, you can ship features faster. As long as you have process around it, you're not breaking the site all the time or something. So you can actually get to a more intense execution rhythm with better feedback loops.
And when you think about DevTool founders, what's a common mistake that the first time founders make when they are commercializing their work?
It's a good question. I think building in public too early is a mistake. Ideally, you are deeply embedded in a company, either employed at that company or as like a consultant or something, or you have an early design partner, and you're not beholden to change management in a community, and you can iterate extremely quickly. Because once you start having open source dependencies and you have a big complicated surface area, people get embedded in their workflows and changing things becomes an order or two orders of magnitude harder. So think very deeply about how you will maintain the speed of your feedback loops. Be very cognizant of what your, to use a parlance, your one-way doors are, right? This is a Jeff Bezos thing. There are one-way doors and two-way doors. And two-way doors, you can undo decisions, and one-way doors, you can't. And once you start shipping software to the public, there's lots of one-way doors, or maybe like 1.5-way doors. It's kind of like it's like a rental car thing where like you can go forward and you're fine, but going backwards, you pop a tire, right?
Right.
Maybe that's a third thing. The two-way door, but there's a trap. So I think that is one thing that I think is very important. I think the other one mistake I made is that I think at a certain stage, I stepped back too much technically. I kind of took the advice of like, oh, you got to let the team execute, and you got to like, think about strategy and recruiting only, and et cetera, et cetera. I actually think that was a mistake. I think like you need a super strong product vision, and to keep it cohesive. So, I'm very much on the Toby Luke that I think speaks well on that, how like he kind of strategically micromanages the things he cares about. And I would highly recommend that you continue to do that. You can't do everything. He has this great analogy. He's like, it's kind of like playing a real-time strategy game where like sometimes you have to zoom in and go micro, like really think about tactics and let it all burn down over here because this is what matters to win. And then sometimes you need to zoom back out and think about resource management and like higher level stuff. And like good founders are able to like zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out very quickly and have a good instinct about where to engage and how to focus their time. And I think like if you're a DevTools founder and you have technical taste and your job is to communicate about the product, it's very important to like maintain control of the product.
This is amazing. And also to the point of the micromanagement, I think Jerry Seinfeld in one of his interviews, he said something similar to the effect of, the way we made the show is I micromanage every little thing from start to end. That's how we made the show. It was incredibly hard. It's painful, but if you want to get it right, it's just there's no way around it. And obviously you have to take a step back when it's time. But I think It's a very interesting point because many times as companies get bigger, as you said, there's a tendency to like, hey, I gotta, you hire great people and let them do their thing. But I think the part B to that is like strategically at times you got to go way deep and do the thing, or else the company's gonna just
Yeah.
head in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's like selective. You have to selectively micromanage, and then you have to be explicit internally about what you're going to selectively micromanage versus not, because you just can't do it on everything. And there's parts of the business where, you're kind of talking to the team, you're like, listen, I know what you do is really important, but our relationship is more of like a contract where like you're fulfilling this role and it's kind of abstracted away from me. And then to this other team is like, I'm going to be up in your grill like all the time. And like, if you don't want that, like, that's fine, but we shouldn't like, let's have no illusions about that. Cause that's what I care about. And hopefully you're here because you want to work with me in that capacity. Right. So the other side is like, if you want my personal love and attention all the time on every detail of your work, like, it's not going to happen. Like, I don't have like, it's not my focus. It is incredibly valuable, like I'm not,
Right.
that's kind of like me, and like I have this good relationship, I think, with our front end developers where like I like the front end is like incredibly important to our product. It's what sells it in a lot of ways. But like the front end architecture, it's like, guys, that's your domain. Like, I know you're really good at your job. I don't have differentiated value there. So we're going to communicate about like the product ontology and make that all make sense. But like you have free reign on execution as long as things go well. Right. But there's other parts of the product where like I care deeply about the execution at a tactical level. So
I think this is incredible. I think your point about sales engineers and now I think being popularized as forward deployed engineers, I think is
yeah, I
becoming
know,
is in vogue.
Palantir,
So,
right?
yeah. I think
We joke around about it. We're like, okay, every engineer at Palantir is Jason Bourne,
right. And I think it kind of the things you're saying, it ties very nicely to the central point is the tightness or the speed of the feedback loop. Whatever you do, the reason you have a sales engineer is that you want to like know the pulse of the customer, and also your other point. I think so. It's very for building a dev tooling startup, the speed of the feedback loops, it just matters a lot. I think it just helps you iterate. No, this is
yeah.
amazing. We can keep talking all day, but we're at the rapid fire round. I'll ask a series of questions and would love to hear your answers in 15 seconds or less. You ready?
Let's go.
All right. Question number one. What's your favorite?
All right, I'll limit it to the kind of business startup-y context. The Great CEO Within by Matt Mochary. I don't like the title because it sounds too generic businessy, but it's an incredible book for any manager, I think. Anyone managing up a CEO and for prospective founders to make sure that like this is what your life is going to be like once the startup grows. Are you down with that? And be honest with yourself.
Right. Which historical figure do you admire the most and why?
It's a good question. I think my default answer for that is Churchill. I think he was the greatest man of the 20th century and saved Western civilization, which I care a lot about. So, but that changes by the month. So I'll go with Churchill for now.
Yeah, this is I think his story is fascinating, especially in his formative years and in South Africa, the Boer War. So this is a great book. Yeah, his story is fascinating. All right. Next question. What has been an important but overlooked AI trend in the last 12 months?
Have there been any overlooked trends? I think it's kind of hard to answer. I literally my entire world is full of AI. I'm going to have to take a pass on that one because I think I feel like every trend is looked at.
Every trend is looked at too much and analyzed in great detail. Maybe a different way to ask the question: what AI advancements are the most exciting to you? The more recent ones.
So I think so. The most exciting ones to me, I am very excited at how the application layer is going to develop over AI. The foundation models and the chatbots are like incredible. And but kind of everyone sees that incredible. I think there's a ton of innovation to do in the application layer. I'm supposed to do this in 15 seconds, right? So like the one I'm living with right now is that I'm kind of a little late to the party Claude Code adopter. And I think Claude Code is pretty amazing. It's kind of an application layer over the core models that speaks to me as a more experienced software developer. I feel it's like a bridge tool for late millennial Gen X software engineers to AI. Cause like I'm practically a boomer when it comes to this sort of stuff. But yeah, I'm very excited about the AI going beyond the chatbot interface is what I'm excited about. I think would be the long and short of it.
What's the one thing about data infrastructure that most people don't get?
I think that most people don't get. Everyone is very tempted or so interested in all these scale problems and data scale. But I don't think most people get about data infrastructure that now the big challenges are massive complexity, scale, and managing all these different stakeholders. Again, it's kind of like application level. In some ways, a lot of the infra problems, not all of them, I think there's a lot of startups that push back are like more solved than these like higher level concerns. So I think the most of the value to deliver is, or a lot of it is in the application layer.
What separates great AI products from the merely good ones?
For me, transparency and control. So a very simple example is I really like Diamond, which is Graphite, which is a code review tool. They have a kind of a code review bot, and it's very transparent and very scoped of what it claims to do. And I think that's a great way to get broader adoption and also get, because like whenever AI product feels like a hallucinating demon, you like lose all trust in it and you just want it to go away. So I think these like the great ones have trust and control so that you can like be empowered rather than terrified.
It's amazing. The CEO of Graphite, Merrill, he was on the podcast a couple of months ago, so he would be happy to hear that his
Yeah.
Graphite is being used as an example as a here. All right, next question. What have you changed your mind on recently?
I guess sticking to the AI theme, I was very skeptical about the ability of AI tools to contribute to production code bases. I've flipped now. I think that properly conceived of, and I think there's a lot of undiscovered country here, that they will be instrumental in even large systems in going beyond vibe coding.
What's your number one advice to founders who are starting out today?
Be in person until product market fit.
That's amazing. It's brilliant, and I couldn't agree more. You gotta like just be there, and yeah, that's great. That's great. Amazing, Nick. This has been a brilliant discussion. I loved the depth of the answers on both the technology side, but also just the founder company building side. So thank you again for coming onto the show.
Yeah, no, I had a great time. Thanks so much.